The dust kicked up around her bare feet as she ran, clutching the hard roll of bread against her hollow chest, like it was pure gold instead of yesterday's leftovers. And she could hear the angry shouts of the saloon keeper echoing behind her down the main street of Silver Reef, Utah, in the scorching summer of 1882. Seraphina Winters didn't look back. She never did anymore. Looking back meant slowing down, and slowing down meant getting caught, and getting caught meant another bruise to add to the collection already modeling her ribs and arms. At 19 years old, she had learned more about survival than most folks learned in a lifetime. Her parents had died 2 years ago when their wagon overturned crossing a swollen creek, and she had been on her own ever since, drifting from town to town across the Utah Territory, taking what work she could find and stealing what she couldn't afford when hunger gnawed too hard at her insides. Silver Reef was supposed to be different. The mining town had silver in its veins and money flowing through its streets, or so she had heard. But money only flowed for those who already had some, she discovered quickly enough. The mine owners lived in fine houses on the hill while workers crowded into boarding houses, and homeless girls like her weren't welcome anywhere, except maybe the cribs down by the eastern edge of town. And she would rather starve than end up there. She darted around the corner of the general store, her worn dress flapping around her legs. The fabric had once been blue, she thought, but now it was the color of dust and hard living. She needed to find somewhere to hide, somewhere to catch her breath and eat this bread before someone else tried to take it from her. That was when she saw him. He sat alone at a table outside the Silver Dollar restaurant, a plate of steak and potatoes steaming in front of him, a cup of coffee beside it. He wore a dusty brown hat pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair and a face that looked like it had seen both hard work and harder weather. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, someone who spent his days in the saddle rather than in the mines. He was maybe 23 or 24, she guessed, with broad shoulders and hands that rested easy on the table like he was comfortable in his own skin. The sight of that food made her stomach clench so hard she nearly cried out. She had eaten nothing but an apple core she found behind the mercantile yesterday, and that bread in her hands suddenly seemed pitifully small compared to the feast on that table. She didn't plan it. Planning took time and thought, and she had neither. Her body moved on instinct, driven by hunger that had become a constant companion. She rushed toward the table, fully intending to grab something, anything, from that plate and keep running. But her bare foot caught on an uneven board in the sidewalk, and she stumbled. The bread flew from her hands and landed in the dirt. She scrambled forward anyway, reaching desperately for the bread roll that had been sitting on the edge of his plate, and her fingers closed around it just as his hand closed around her wrist. Seraphina froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She waited for the shout, for the blow, for him to drag her to the sheriff or throw her into the street. Men didn't take kindly to being stolen from, especially not by vagrants. But the shout never came. "Easy there," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. He wasn't squeezing her wrist to hurt her, just holding it steady. "You are going to choke if you try to run and eat at the same time." She stared at him, unable to form words. Up close, she could see his eyes were a warm brown like good earth after rain. There was no anger in them, just something that looked almost like concern. "Sit down and eat with me," he said, and released her wrist. Seraphina didn't move. This had to be a trick. Men didn't just invite starving thieves to share their meals. They called the law or took justice into their own hands. "I am serious," he continued, pulling out the chair across from him with his boot. "You look like you need a proper meal more than I need to eat alone. Sit down before that bread gets any dirtier." She glanced down. The bread roll she had grabbed was still clutched in her fist, and her other hand had landed hard in the dirt. Her knees were scraped from the stumble. She must look like something the cat dragged in and decided wasn't worth the effort. "I do not have money to pay you," she said, her voice coming out rough and suspicious. "Did I ask for money?" He gestured at the chair again. "Sit down, miss. My mama raised me better than to let a lady go hungry." "I am not a lady," Seraphina said, but she found herself moving toward the chair anyway. Her body betrayed her, drawn by the promise of food and the strange kindness in this man's eyes. She sat down carefully, perching on the edge of the chair like she might need to bolt at any second. He picked up the menu that was lying on the table and waved at a woman who stood in the doorway of the restaurant. "Martha, can we get another plate over here? Same as mine and another coffee." The woman, middle-aged with graying hair and a clean apron, looked from him to Seraphina with raised eyebrows. Seraphina knew what she saw. A dirty, barefoot girl with tangled brown hair and a dress that had more holes than fabric. The kind of girl respectable folks crossed the street to avoid. "You sure about that, Zane?" Martha asked. "I am sure," he said firmly. "And maybe some water too if you have it." Martha disappeared back inside, shaking her head. Zane turned his attention back to Seraphina, and she resisted the urge to squirm under his gaze. "I am Zane Quinton," he said, as casually as if they were meeting at a church social. "I work at the Running W Ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Brought a herd into the holding pens this morning." She said nothing, still waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. "You got a name?" He asked when she remained silent. "Seraphina," she finally said. "Seraphina Winters." "That is a pretty name." He said it matter of fact, not like he was trying to charm her. "You from around here, Seraphina?" "I am from nowhere," she said. "Everywhere, does it matter?" He studied her for a moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he saw more than she wanted him to. "I suppose it does not," he said finally. "What matters is you are here now and you are hungry." Martha emerged with a plate piled high with steak, potatoes, and green beans, along with a glass of water and a cup of coffee. She set them down in front of Seraphina without comment, though her expression suggested she had plenty of opinions she was keeping to herself. Seraphina stared at the food. Her hands trembled. She wanted to grab it and shove it in her mouth, but some deeply buried part of her that remembered better days whispered that she should have manners, should say thank you, should not act like the animal circumstances had tried to make her. "Go ahead," Zane said quietly. "It is yours." She picked up the fork, and her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She managed to spear a piece of steak and brought it to her mouth. The first bite exploded with flavor across her tongue, rich and savory, and so good she thought she might cry. She chewed slowly, forcing herself not to gulp it down, and then took another bite, and another. Zane ate his own meal and said nothing, giving her space to eat without the weight of conversation. She was grateful for that. She cleaned her plate methodically, not wasting a single bean or scrap of potato. When she was done, she drained the water glass and sat back, feeling more full than she had in months. "Thank you," she said, the words scraping out past pride and suspicion. "I did not expect kindness." "Most folks do not these days," Zane said. He pushed his half-finished coffee toward her. "You want this? I have had enough." She took it, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it tasted like luxury. "Why did you do this?" she asked. "You do not know me." "I tried to steal from you." "You tried to steal a piece of bread because you were starving," Zane corrected. "That is different than stealing because you want to. I have been hungry before, Seraphina. Not like you, maybe, but hungry enough to know what it drives a person to do. So this is pity." She said it flatly, feeling the warmth of the meal start to curdle in her stomach. "This is decency," he countered. "Or trying at it anyway. My pa used to say that luck is the only difference between a man with a roof over his head and one sleeping under the stars." "You had some bad luck, I am guessing." "My parents died," she heard herself say. "2 years ago. There was no money, no family. I have been working where I can, but most places do not want to hire someone like me." She gestured at herself, at the obvious truth of her circumstances. Zane nodded slowly. "That is hard. I am sorry about your folks." She shrugged, not trusting herself to say more. Sympathy was harder to take than contempt somehow. "Are you staying somewhere in town?" he asked. "I was sleeping in the stable loft until the owner found me yesterday," she admitted. "I have been looking for somewhere else. And work. Are you looking for that too, always?" she said. "But like I said, most folks take one look at me and decide I am not worth the trouble." Zane was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "The Running W Ranch belongs to my boss, Walter Quinn. He is a fair man, runs a good operation. His wife, Dorothy, manages the house and has been complaining about needing help now that their regular girl got married and moved to California. It is not glamorous work, mostly cooking and cleaning, but it comes with a room and 3 meals a day plus wages." Seraphina stared at him. "You are offering me a job." "I am saying I could talk to the Quinns about it," Zane corrected. "But you would have to actually want it. Ranch work is not easy, even the house work. It is long days and early mornings." "I am not afraid of work," Seraphina said quickly. "I can work hard. I can learn anything they need me to learn." "I believe you," Zane said, and something in his tone made her think he actually did. "Tell you what. I have to head back to the ranch this afternoon. If you want, you can ride out with me and I will introduce you to the Quinns. What they decide after that is up to them, but at least you will have had a chance." "I do not have a horse," she said, then felt stupid for stating the obvious. "You can ride with me," Zane said simply. "My horse can handle 2 for the ride out." She wanted to say yes so badly her chest ached with it, but old fears held her back. "What do you want from me in return?" Zane met her eyes steadily. "Nothing. I want nothing from you except that you show up willing to work if the Quinns give you a chance. That is all." "Men always want something," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Some men do," Zane acknowledged. "I am not one of them." "You have my word on that, for what it is worth." Seraphina searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint of the ulterior motives she had learned to expect. But his expression was open and honest, and something in her chest, some part of her that still wanted to believe people could be good, whispered that she should trust him. "All right," she said. "I will go with you." Zane smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and lighter. "Good. We will leave in about an hour. That gives you time to clean up a bit if you want. There is a pump behind the restaurant where you can wash up." He stood and pulled some coins from his pocket, leaving them on the table for Martha. Seraphina stood too, suddenly awkward now that the meal was over and the weight of what she had agreed to settled on her shoulders. "Thank you," she said again. "Really. I do not know why you are helping me, but I am grateful." "Everyone needs help sometimes," Zane said. "Come on, I will show you where that pump is." He led her around the side of the restaurant to a small yard area where a water pump stood next to a trough. Someone had left a bar of soap on a nearby ledge, and Zane retrieved it along with a relatively clean cloth that hung from a nail. "Take your time," he said, handing her the soap. "I will be in the general store across the street getting some supplies. Come find me when you are ready." He tipped his hat to her and walked away, leaving her alone with the pump and the soap and the first real chance she had been given in 2 years. Seraphina worked the pump handle until cold water gushed out. She scrubbed her hands first, watching the dirt and grime slide away to reveal skin that was paler than she remembered. She washed her face, her arms, her feet. The water was shockingly cold, but it felt like baptism, like washing away some of the hardness that had accumulated on her like dust on a window pane. She did what she could with her hair, wetting it and combing through the tangles with her fingers. There was no mirror, but she felt cleaner than she had in weeks. Her dress was still a disaster, but at least she would not smell like the street. When she was done, she made her way across to the general store. The inside was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. Shelves lined the walls, packed with everything from canned goods to rope to bolts of fabric. The smell of coffee and leather and tobacco filled the air. Zane stood at the counter, settling up his bill with the clerk. He had a small sack of supplies that he tucked under his arm when he saw her. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked together down the street toward the livery stable. People stared at them, at the cowboy and the vagrant girl, and Seraphina could feel their judgment like heat from a stove. But Zane walked like he did not notice or did not care, and something about his calm confidence made it easier for her to hold her head up. At the stable, Zane saddled a rangy buckskin gelding with practiced efficiency. The horse nickered softly and bumped Zane's shoulder with his nose. "This is Duke," Zane said, patting the horse's neck. "He is a good steady mount, and he will not mind carrying double for a while." He swung up into the saddle and then extended his hand down to Seraphina. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His grip was strong and sure, and he pulled her up behind him with easy strength. She settled awkwardly on the horse's back, unsure where to put her hands. "You are going to need to hold on," Zane said over his shoulder. "Just put your arms around my waist." Duke has an easy gait, but I would rather you not fall off. Tentatively, Seraphina wrapped her arms around him. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. It had been so long since she had been close to another person in any way that was not violent or threatening. The simple human contact made her throat tight. Zane clucked to Duke, and the horse moved forward at a walk, picking his way through the busy street before turning onto the road that led out of town. Once they were clear of the buildings, Zane urged Duke into an easy lope that covered ground without jarring too much. The landscape opened up around them, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. The summer sun beat down relentlessly, but the wind created by their movement kept it from being unbearable. Seraphina rested her cheek against Zane's back and let herself feel something she had not felt in a long time: hope. The ride took about 45 minutes, which Zane spent pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch. The Running W had been established 5 years ago by Walter Quinn, who had moved out from Colorado with his wife Dorothy, and their dream of building something lasting. They ran about 200 head of cattle and bred some of the best working horses in the territory. It was not the biggest outfit, but it was prosperous and well respected. "How long have you worked there?" Seraphina asked, raising her voice to be heard over the thud of hoofbeats. 3 years, Zane called back. "I drifted around after my folks passed, doing day work here and there. Walter gave me a job and a place to stay when I needed it most. He is good people, him and Dorothy both. If they take you on, you will be treated fair." "What about the other hands? How many work there?" "Right now we have got 5 steady cowboys, including me, plus a foreman named Jack Murphy. He is a little gruff, but decent enough once you get to know him. There is a bunkhouse for the men and a separate room in the main house that Dorothy used for her previous help. If they hire you, that is where you would stay." Seraphina absorbed this information, trying to imagine what it would be like to have a room of her own again, to sleep in a bed instead of on the ground or in hay lofts. It seemed almost too good to be real. The ranch appeared gradually on the horizon, starting with the fence lines and then the buildings themselves. The main house was a solid two-story structure painted white with a wide porch wrapped around the front. A barn stood nearby, along with a stable, a bunkhouse, and various other outbuildings. Cottonwood trees provided shade near the house, and Seraphina could see the glint of water from what must be a creek or pond behind the barn. It looked like a place where people built lives, where they put down roots and made plans for the future. It looked like everything Seraphina had lost and thought she would never have again. Zane rode Duke up to the main house and dismounted, then helped Seraphina down. Her legs were shaky from the ride and from nerves. He tied Duke to the hitching post near the porch and turned to her. "Let me do the talking at first," he said quietly. "Just be yourself and be honest. Dorothy can spot a lie from a mile away, so do not try to pretty things up or make yourself sound different than you are." Seraphina nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. Zane climbed the porch steps and knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s with blonde hair streaked with gray and kind blue eyes. She wore a simple brown dress covered by a flour-dusted apron, and she smiled when she saw Zane. "Zane, you are back earlier than I expected," Dorothy Quinn said. "Did everything go all right in town?" "Yes, madam. We got a good price for the cattle," Zane said. "But I was hoping I could speak with you and Walter about something, if you have a moment." Dorothy's gaze moved past Zane to Seraphina, and her expression shifted to curiosity mixed with concern. "Of course. Come on in. Walter is in his office going over the books." She stepped back to let them in, and Seraphina followed Zane into the house. The interior was clean and well kept, with polished wood floors and simple furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. The smell of baking bread filled the air, and Seraphina's newly full stomach gave a small rumble of appreciation. Dorothy led them down a short hallway to a room where a man sat at a desk covered with papers and ledgers. Walter Quinn was in his late 40s, with graying brown hair and the weathered face of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. He looked up when they entered and set down his pen. "Zane," he said in greeting. "And who is this?" "This is Seraphina Winters," Zane said. "I met her in town this afternoon, and she is looking for work. I remembered you mentioning that Dorothy needed help with the house, so I thought I would bring her out to meet you both." Walter and Dorothy exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that long-married couples could manage. Then Dorothy turned to Seraphina. "What kind of work have you done before, Miss Winters?" she asked gently. Seraphina straightened her shoulders and met Dorothy's eyes. "I grew up helping my mother run our household. I can cook, clean, sew, and do laundry. I can handle basic repairs, and I learn quickly if there is something I do not know. I have been on my own for 2 years since my parents passed, doing whatever work I could find. I am willing to work hard, and I will not cause trouble. Where have you been staying?" Walter asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "Wherever I could," Seraphina said honestly. "I have not had a permanent place in a long time. I know I do not look like much right now, but I clean up decent, and I promise I will earn whatever wages you pay me." Dorothy stepped closer, studying Seraphina with a gaze that seemed to see right through to her bones. "You are very thin," she said quietly. "When did you last have a proper meal?" "Today," Seraphina admitted. "Zane bought me dinner in town." Dorothy looked at Zane, and something passed across her face. Approval, maybe, or respect. "That was kind of you, Zane." "It seemed like the right thing to do," Zane said simply. Walter stood and walked around his desk, stopping in front of Seraphina. "I will be straight with you, Miss Winters. We do need help around here. Dorothy has been running herself ragged trying to keep up with the house and the cooking for the hands. But we need someone reliable, someone who will stick around and do the job right. Can you be that person?" "Yes, sir," Seraphina said, putting every ounce of conviction she had into the words. "I can be that person. I want to be that person. I am tired of drifting. I want a place to stay and work to do. If you give me a chance, I will prove myself to you." Walter studied her for a long moment, then looked at his wife. "What do you think, Dorothy?" "I think everyone deserves a chance," Dorothy said. "And I think Zane would not have brought her here if he did not believe she was worth our time." She turned to Seraphina. "We can give you a trial period. 1 month. You will help me with the cooking, cleaning, laundry, and whatever else needs doing around the house. You will have your own room, 3 meals a day, and $10 a month in wages. If it works out after the month, we will make it permanent and discuss raising your wages." How does that sound? $10 a month was not much, but with room and board it was more security than Seraphina had known in 2 years. "That sounds more than fair," she said, and her voice shook slightly despite her best efforts. Thank you both." "Do not thank us yet," Walter said, but his stern expression softened slightly. "Wait until you have lived through one of Dorothy's spring cleaning fits. She will work you until you drop." "Oh, hush," Dorothy said, swatting her husband's arm. "Come on, Seraphina. Let me show you to your room and get you some proper clothes to wear. That dress has seen better days." "I will get Duke settled," Zane said. "Welcome to the running W, Seraphina." She met his eyes and found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Thank you," she said again. "I will not let you down, any of you." "I know you will not," Zane said, and then he was gone, the front door closing softly behind him. Dorothy led Seraphina up the stairs to the second floor and down a hallway to a small room at the end. It held a narrow bed with a real mattress and quilts, a dresser with a mirror, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. To Seraphina, it looked like a palace. "It is not much," Dorothy said apologetically, "but it is yours for as long as you are here." "It is perfect," Seraphina breathed. She walked to the bed and ran her hand over the quilt. The fabric was soft under her palm, the stitching even and careful. "I have not had a bed in so long." Dorothy's expression shifted to something that looked like heartbreak. "Oh, you poor dear. Come on, let us find you some clothes. I think I have a few dresses that might fit with some alterations, and we will get you some proper shoes." She bustled out, and Seraphina followed her to another room that served as storage. Dorothy pulled out a trunk and began rummaging through it, producing several dresses in various shades of brown and gray. "These were mine when I was younger and thinner," Dorothy said with a wry smile. "I have been meaning to do something with them. Try this one." She held up a simple gray cotton dress with long sleeves and a modest neckline. Seraphina took it hesitantly. "You can change here," Dorothy said. "I will step out and give you some privacy. There are undergarments in the top drawer of that dresser if you need them." She left, closing the door behind her. Seraphina quickly stripped out of her ruined dress and pulled on the clean undergarments, then the gray dress. It was slightly too large in the bust and loose in the waist, but it was clean and whole and more than she had any right to hope for. There was even a pair of boots that fit reasonably well when she laced them tight. When she emerged, Dorothy looked her over with a critical but kind eye. "Much better. We will take in the waist this evening, but it will do for now. Are you hungry?" "I know Zane said he fed you in town, but that was hours ago." "I am all right," Seraphina said, though the mention of food made her stomach wake up hopefully. She did not want to seem greedy. "Nonsense," Dorothy said briskly. "You are thin as a rail. Come down to the kitchen." and I will teach you how I like things done while we make supper for the hands. They will be coming in from the range soon, and they eat like locusts." Seraphina followed Dorothy down to the kitchen, which was spacious and well equipped with a large cast iron stove, a sturdy work table, and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. Dorothy handed her an apron and began pulling out ingredients. "We keep it simple but hearty," Dorothy explained as she worked. "The men need fuel for the hard work they do. Tonight we are making stew with biscuits and apple pie for dessert. Can you make biscuits?" "Yes, madam," Seraphina said. "My mother taught me." "Good. Show me your technique while I get the stew started." They worked side by side, and Seraphina felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as her hands fell into the familiar rhythm of measuring and mixing and kneading. Cooking was something she understood, something she could do well. Dorothy watched her work and nodded approvingly. "Your mother taught you well," she said. "Those biscuits look perfect." "She was a good cook," Seraphina said softly. "She said it was important to be able to feed people you care about." "She was right," Dorothy said. "Food is love in its way." "Now, tell me about yourself while we work. Where are you from originally?" Seraphina found herself talking as they prepared the meal, telling Dorothy about growing up in a small farming community in Colorado, about how her father had decided to move west for better opportunities, and how they had never made it, about the accident that took both her parents and left her with nothing. Dorothy listened without judgment, making sympathetic noises and asking gentle questions that drew out more of Seraphina's story than she had told anyone in 2 years. By the time the sun began to set, the stew was bubbling on the stove, the biscuits were ready to go in the oven, and the pie was cooling on the windowsill. Dorothy showed Seraphina how to set the long table in the dining room that connected to the kitchen, laying out plates and utensils for 8 people. "Walter and I eat with the hands," Dorothy explained. "We are all part of the same operation, and it helps keep everyone feeling like a team. You will eat with us too, once the food is served." The hands began arriving as the sun touched the horizon, dusty and tired from a day's work. They washed up at the pump outside and trooped into the dining room with the kind of eager anticipation that spoke of hard physical labor and empty stomachs. Seraphina hung back in the kitchen, suddenly nervous about meeting all these men at once. Zane came in last, having apparently taken extra time with Duke. He caught Seraphina's eye and gave her an encouraging nod before taking his seat at the table. Walter called everyone to order. "Listen up, we have someone new joining us. This is Seraphina Winters. She will be helping Dorothy with the house and cooking. I expect everyone to treat her with respect and give her space to do her job. Seraphina, these are my hands." He went around the table making introductions. There was Jack Murphy, the foreman, a weathered man in his 50s with a grizzled beard and sharp eyes. Then there was Thomas Hayes, a young cowboy maybe 20 years old with red hair and freckles. Next came Samuel Green and his younger brother David, both in their mid-20s with similar dark features. Finally, there was Henry Colt, who looked to be in his 30s and had the quiet demeanor of someone who kept to himself. The men nodded or mumbled greetings, eyeing Seraphina with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. She nodded back, keeping her expression neutral. "All right, let us eat before it gets cold," Dorothy announced, and the focus quickly shifted to food. Seraphina helped Dorothy bring out the stew and biscuits, and then they both sat down at the table. Seraphina found herself seated between Dorothy and Zane, which felt like the safest possible position. The men dug into the food with enthusiasm, and the compliments they paid between bites seemed genuine. "This is even better than usual, Dorothy," Walter said. "You have been holding out on us." Seraphina made the biscuits, Dorothy said, and she helped with the stew. Several pairs of eyes swung toward Seraphina. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. They are real good, Thomas said earnestly. Best I have had in a while. Thank you, Seraphina managed. The conversation flowed around her as the men discussed the work of the day and plans for tomorrow. She listened more than she spoke, getting a feel for the personalities and relationships. Jack Murphy seemed to run a tight ship but was fair with his criticism. Thomas was eager and sometimes clumsy but willing. The Green brothers worked well as a team. Henry Colt barely spoke but watched everything. And Zane, she noticed, was respected by all of them, his opinion sought and valued even though he was not the foreman. After dinner, Seraphina and Dorothy cleared the table and brought out the pie. The men devoured it with the same enthusiasm they had shown the rest of the meal. And then they began to drift away, heading to the bunkhouse or outside to smoke and enjoy the cooling evening air. Zane lingered, helping carry dishes to the kitchen despite Dorothy's protests that it was not his job. "You did good today," he said to Seraphina quietly while Dorothy was in the other room. "The Quinns like you, I can tell." "I hope so," Seraphina said. "I really need this to work out." "It will," Zane said with certainty. "You are a hard worker and a good person. That is all they ask for." "Why did you help me?" Seraphina asked suddenly. "Really? You did not know me. You did not owe me anything." Zane was quiet for a moment, drying a plate with a dish towel he had picked up. "My mama died when I was 12, he said finally. "My pa raised me and my sister on his own after that. It was hard, and people helped us when they did not have to. When Pa died 5 years ago, I understood what it felt like to be alone and scared and not know where the next meal was coming from. Someone helped me then too. Walter Quinn, as it turned out. So when I saw you today, hungry and desperate, I just thought maybe I could be the person who helped this time. Pass it forward, you know?" Seraphina felt something crack open in her chest, some hard shell that had been protecting her heart. "You are a good man, Zane Quinton." "I am just trying to be," Zane said. "That is all any of us can do, really. Try to be decent and hope it is enough." Dorothy came back in then, and the moment passed. But something had shifted between Seraphina and Zane, some understanding or connection that had not been there before. That night, Seraphina lay in her narrow bed under the soft quilts and stared at the ceiling. The mattress felt impossibly soft after so many nights on the ground. Through the window, she could hear the peaceful sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Somewhere a horse nickered. Crickets sang in the darkness. And for the first time in 2 years, Seraphina felt safe. She fell asleep with tears on her cheeks, but they were not tears of grief or fear. They were tears of relief and gratitude and fragile, cautious hope. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that Seraphina had not experienced since before her parents died. She woke before dawn each morning to help Dorothy prepare breakfast for the hands. They would eat together at the big table, the men fueling up for a long day of work. Then Seraphina would clean the kitchen while Dorothy packed lunches for whoever was riding out to the far pastures. The days were full of work. There was always laundry to scrub, floors to sweep and mop, mending to be done, bread to be baked, vegetables to be tended in the garden behind the house, chickens to be fed and their eggs collected. Dorothy taught her the specific way she liked things done, but she was patient with Seraphina's questions and mistakes. The work was hard, but it was honest work, and Seraphina threw herself into it with determination. She wanted to prove herself, to show the Quinns and especially Zane that their faith in her had not been misplaced. The hands treated her with cautious respect at first, keeping their distance and their conversations brief. But slowly, as the days passed and she proved she was there to stay and do her job, They began to relax around her. Thomas, in particular, became friendly, always quick with a smile and a terrible joke. The Green brothers were polite, and sometimes helped her carry heavy baskets of laundry without being asked. Even Jack Murphy gave her a gruff nod of approval when she brought cold water and sandwiches out to the corral where the men were breaking a new horse. But it was Zane she found herself watching for, waiting for. He would come in from the range dusty and tired, but he always had a kind word for her, always asked how her day had been. Sometimes in the evenings after supper, he would linger in the kitchen while she washed dishes, drying them and putting them away while they talked about everything and nothing. She learned that he had a sister named Rebecca who had married a shopkeeper in Salt Lake City, and he rode up to visit her twice a year. She learned that his favorite color was the blue of the sky right before sunset, and that he had a sweet tooth for Dorothy's apple pie. She learned that he was good with horses, that the other hands came to him when they had problems with a difficult mount, and that he had a gentle patience that worked magic on even the most skittish animal. And he learned about her too, drawing out stories of her childhood, her parents, her dreams of what she had wanted before life had taken such a hard turn. She told him about her mother's garden and her father's laugh, and the way they used to sing together on Sunday mornings. Seraphina did not let herself think too hard about the warmth that spread through her chest when Zane smiled at her, or the way her heart beat faster when their hands accidentally touched passing a dish. She was here to work, to rebuild her life, and she could not afford to get distracted by feelings that might not be returned. But 3 weeks into her employment, something happened that changed things. She had been gathering eggs from the chicken coop late one afternoon when she heard shouting from the direction of the main corral. She set down her basket and hurried around the barn to see what was wrong. A horse was loose in the corral, a young mare that they had been trying to break. She was rearing and kicking, wild-eyed with panic. Thomas was on the ground, clutching his leg and grimacing in pain. The other hands were trying to corner the horse, but she was too frantic, too dangerous. Without thinking, Seraphina climbed up on the corral fence. The mare was beautiful despite her fear, a dapple gray with a dark mane and intelligent eyes. Seraphina had always loved horses, had helped her father with theirs when she was young. "Easy, girl," she called out, her voice low and soothing. "Nobody is going to hurt you. Easy now." The mare's ears flicked toward her, and for a moment their eyes met. Seraphina kept talking, nonsense words of comfort, the same tone she would use to calm a frightened child. She could hear someone behind her, probably one of the hands telling her to get down, but she ignored them. Slowly, the mare stopped rearing. She snorted and danced sideways, but her panic was ebbing. Seraphina climbed down into the corral, moving with careful, deliberate slowness. Jack Murphy hissed at her to stop, to get out, but she paid him no mind. "That is a good girl," Seraphina murmured, taking a step toward the horse. "You are just scared, are not you? Someone was too rough with you, pushed too hard, but you are all right now. Nobody here wants to hurt you." The mare watched her approach, trembling but no longer trying to bolt. Seraphina held out her hand, letting the horse smell her, get used to her presence. After a moment, the mare stretched out her neck and snuffled at Seraphina's palm. "There you go," Seraphina said softly. "See, just a scared girl like me. We understand each other, do not we?" She reached up slowly and touched the mare's neck, running her hand along the sweaty coat in long, soothing strokes. The horse leaned into the touch, and Seraphina felt the tension drain out of the animal's body. Behind her, she heard someone climb into the corral. She glanced back to see Zane approaching slowly, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. "That was either very brave or very stupid," he said quietly. "I have not decided which." Probably both, Seraphina admitted, but look at her. She was just scared. Zane came to stand beside her, and together they calmed the mare further. He produced a lead rope from his pocket and carefully clipped it to the halter the horse wore. The mare allowed it without fuss. "You have a gift," Zane said. "I have been trying to work with this mare for a week, and she has not let me get this close. My father used to say horses are like people. They respond to kindness and patience," Seraphina said. "This one just needed someone to understand her fear instead of trying to dominate it." They led the mare to her stall in the barn, and by the time they got there she was following docilely. Once she was settled with food and water, Zane turned to Seraphina. "That was amazing," he said. "Truly. But please do not do anything like that again without someone there to help you. If that horse had kicked you, she could have killed you." "Is Thomas all right?" Seraphina asked, suddenly remembering the young cowboy on the ground. "Bruised but not broken," Zane assured her. "Henry took him to get checked out by Dorothy. He will be sore for a few days, but he will live." They stood there in the quiet of the barn, dust motes dancing in the shafts of late afternoon light that came through the gaps in the walls. Zane was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something warm and deep that made her breath catch. "You are full of surprises, Seraphina Winters," he said softly. "I have had to be," she replied, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "Surprises kept me alive when I had nothing else." "You have something else now," Zane said. "You have a place here, a home if you want it." "I do want it," Seraphina said. "More than I can say." "Good," Zane said, and he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. "Because I think we all want you to stay." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Seraphina was afraid to name. Then Zane stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should get back. Dorothy will be wondering where you got to." Seraphina nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked back to the house together, and she could feel the shape of things shifting between them, moving from friendship into something else, something that both thrilled and terrified her. That night at supper, Walter brought up the incident with the horse. "I heard you had quite the adventure today, Miss Winters." "I probably should have thought before acting," Seraphina admitted, "but I could not stand to see that mare so afraid." "Well, your instincts were good, even if your judgment was questionable," Walter said with a slight smile. "Zane tells me you have a way with horses. That is a valuable skill. If you are interested, you could help with the gentling work when you have time away from the house." "I would like that very much," Seraphina said, surprised and pleased by the offer. "Good, but be careful. I do not want to have to explain to anyone how my house help got trampled in the corral." "I will be careful, sir." After the meal, Zane found her in the kitchen as usual, but instead of just helping with dishes, he leaned against the counter and said, "Will you take a walk with me? It is a nice evening." Seraphina glanced at Dorothy, who shooed her toward the door. "Go on. The dishes can wait. You have been working since before dawn." So Seraphina found herself walking beside Zane into the cool evening air, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path that led away from the main buildings toward the creek. The sun had set, but the sky still held the last light, painting everything in shades of purple and gold. "I wanted to thank you properly," Zane said, "for what you did today. That mare has been giving us trouble since we brought her in, and you calmed her in minutes. You probably saved us weeks of frustration." "I am glad I could help," Seraphina said. "Horses always made sense to me, more than people sometimes." "I understand that," Zane said. "They are honest in a way people often are not." They reached the creek, which ran clear over smooth stones, catching the last of the light. Zane sat down on a flat boulder near the bank, and Seraphina settled beside him, careful to maintain a respectable distance. "Can I tell you something?" Zane asked after a moment of comfortable silence. "Of course. When I saw you in town that day, trying to steal that bread, I saw myself. Not who I am now, but who I was 5 years ago when my pa died. I was angry at the world, desperate, and starting to do things I was not proud of. If Walter had not given me a chance, I do not know where I would be now. Probably in a jail cell or worse." "You seem like you have always been good," Seraphina said. "No one is always good," Zane said. "We all have the capacity for darkness, especially when we are hurt and scared. But we also have the capacity for light, for choosing to be better. You did that today. You could have stayed angry at the world, could have stayed focused only on survival. But instead, you saw a frightened animal and you chose compassion." "It was just a horse," Seraphina protested. "It was not just a horse," Zane said. "It was a choice to care about something other than yourself. That is important." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were serious. "I like you, Seraphina. I liked you from that first moment when you were all defiance and desperation, clutching that bread like it was the only thing between you and the end of the world. And I like you more every day, seeing you work hard and fit yourself into this place, seeing you laugh at Thomas's terrible jokes and hold your own with Jack Murphy, and gentle that mare that no one else could reach." Seraphina's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I like you too," she said quietly. "You saved me, Zane, not just by feeding me or bringing me here, but by seeing me as a person worth saving when I was not sure I believed it myself anymore." "You were always worth saving," Zane said fiercely. "You just needed a chance to prove it to yourself." He reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "I know it has not been long," he said, "and I do not want to rush you or make you uncomfortable, but I would like permission to court you properly if you are willing. To take you on walks and maybe into town when we have time off, to get to know you better and let you know me." Seraphina felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears. "I would like that," she said. "I would like that very much." Zane's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture old-fashioned and sweet. "Then we have an understanding," he said. They sat by the creek until full darkness fell and the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing. And Seraphina felt something she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten the shape of it: joy. The summer passed into fall, and Seraphina's trial month came and went without any discussion of her leaving. She was part of the running now, as much a fixture as the barn or the creek or the mountains on the horizon. Dorothy gave her a raise to $15 a month, and told her the room was hers for as long as she wanted it. Her courtship with Zane proceeded slowly and sweetly. They took walks in the evening when work was done, and he sometimes came to the kitchen just to sit and talk while she prepared vegetables for the next day's meals. On his days off, he would drive her into Silver Reef in the ranch wagon, and they would walk through town like a proper couple, stopping at the general store or the church social. People who had looked through her when she was homeless now nodded politely and called her Miss Winters. She had gone from invisible to respectable, and while part of her resented how much that transformation depended on having clean clothes and a proper place to live, she could not deny that it was easier to move through the world this way. Zane never pushed her for more than she was ready to give. He held her hand, and sometimes on their walks he would put his arm around her shoulders when the evening got cold. He kissed her for the first time in October, standing under the cottonwood tree near the house, his lips soft and gentle against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he whispered against her hair. "I thought you should know." "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered back and felt the truth of it down to her bones, but with the joy came fear. Seraphina had lost everything once before. She knew how quickly happiness could be ripped away, how fragile stability really was. Sometimes at night she would lie awake and worry that it was all too good to be true, that something would happen to take it all away from her again. Dorothy noticed her unease. One afternoon, while they were canning vegetables, the older woman said casually, "You seem troubled lately, dear. Is everything all right with you and Zane?" "Everything is wonderful with Zane," Seraphina said, and meant it. "That is almost the problem. I am so happy, and I keep waiting for something to go wrong." Dorothy set down the jar she was sealing and looked at Seraphina with understanding. "You lost your parents young and lived rough for a long time. It makes sense that you would have trouble trusting good things. I just keep thinking, what if this does not last? What if Zane realizes I am not what he wants? What if something happens to the ranch and I lose this place? What if I end up back on the street with nothing?" "Those are understandable fears," Dorothy said gently. "But you cannot live your whole life waiting for disaster. Sometimes you have to trust that good things can last, that you deserve happiness and security." "How do you do that?" Seraphina asked. "How do you trust when you know how badly things can go wrong?" "You choose to," Dorothy said simply. "Every day, you choose to believe in the good instead of dwelling on the bad. It is not easy, and some days you will fail at it. But you keep choosing, keep trying, and eventually the trust becomes real." Seraphina thought about that conversation for days afterward. And slowly, deliberately, she began to practice what Dorothy had described. When fear rose up in her chest, she would name it, acknowledge it, and then choose to focus on the present moment instead. The present was good. She had food and shelter and meaningful work and people who cared about her. She had Zane, who looked at her like she was the best thing he had ever found. Winter came to the Utah Territory, bringing cold wind and occasional snow. The work on the ranch slowed, with the cattle brought to closer pastures and the hands spending more time maintaining equipment and buildings than riding the range. The shorter days meant more time inside, more time for Seraphina and Zane to be together in the evenings. On Christmas Day, Dorothy prepared a feast and the whole ranch celebrated together. There were presents exchanged, small things mostly, practical gifts like gloves or socks or tobacco. Zane gave Seraphina a beautiful leather-bound journal with blank pages. "I noticed you like to write sometimes," he said. "I thought maybe you would want a proper place to put your words." "I love it," Seraphina said, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "Thank you." She had made him a shirt, sewing it secretly late at night by lamplight in her room. It was not perfect, but the stitching was even and she had embroidered his initials on the cuff. When he tried it on and it fit well, she felt absurdly proud. That evening, after the meal was finished and the dishes were cleaned, Zane asked her to walk with him despite the cold. They bundled up in coats and scarves and stepped out into a world transformed by new snow. Everything was white and clean and quiet. Zane led her to the barn, which was warmer than outside thanks to the body heat of the horses. He had spread blankets in an empty stall, creating a little nest in the sweet-smelling hay. "I wanted to give you your real present in private," he said, suddenly sounding nervous. Seraphina's heart began to beat faster. "You already gave me the journal." "That was just a first present," Zane said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "This is the important one." He opened the box to reveal a ring. It was simple, just a thin gold band with a small dark stone set in it, but to Seraphina it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It is not much," Zane said quickly. "I have been saving my wages, but this was all I could afford. The stone is a garnet, which is not as nice as a diamond, but the jeweler in town said it means devotion and it made me think of you." "Zane," Seraphina whispered, unable to form more words. "I love you, Seraphina," Zane said, and his voice was shaking slightly. "I want to spend my life with you. I want to build a future together, maybe save up and get our own little place someday, raise horses and children and grow old together. Will you marry me?" The tears came then, spilling down her cheeks. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course, yes." Zane let out a breath like he had been holding it for hours and pulled her into his arms. She buried her face against his chest and let herself cry, releasing all the fear and pain and loneliness of the last few years, washing it away with tears of joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it was always meant to be there. Then he kissed her, deep and sweet and full of promise, and Seraphina kissed him back with her whole heart. They were married in February, on a cold, clear day when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. Dorothy and some of the women from town helped Seraphina make a dress from white cotton, simple but pretty. Zane wore his new shirt and borrowed a suit jacket from Walter. The ceremony was held in the small church in Silver Reef, with the Quinns and the ranch hands and a few townspeople in attendance. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Zane kissed her, Seraphina felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This was real. This was hers. She was not alone anymore, and she never would be again. They had no money for a honeymoon or a place of their own yet, so they moved into Zane's room in the bunkhouse for a few nights before Dorothy insisted they could not possibly be comfortable there, and moved them into the spare room in the main house. It was cramped with both of them, but Seraphina did not care. She fell asleep every night in Zane's arms and woke up every morning to his smile, and that was all she needed. The next year was full of hard work and simple pleasures. Seraphina continued to help Dorothy with the house and began to take on more responsibility with the horses. She had a gift for the difficult ones, and soon ranchers from neighboring properties were bringing their problem horses to the running W for her to work with. She did not charge much, but the extra money went into the savings she and Zane were building together. Zane continued his work as a cowboy, but Walter began to rely on him more for decisions and planning. When Jack Murphy announced his retirement, Walter surprised everyone by offering the foreman position to Zane, who accepted with humility and determination to do the job well. And in the spring, Seraphina discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She wanted this baby desperately, wanted to build the family she and Zane had talked about. But she remembered her mother dying of childbed fever when Seraphina was young, and she knew all the things that could go wrong. But Dorothy was there to guide her through the pregnancy with steady reassurance and practical advice. Zane was attentive and loving, taking over her heavier chores and worrying over her like a mother hen. The months passed, her belly growing, and as she felt the baby move inside her, some of the fear transformed into wonder. Their son was born in December, on a snowy evening when the world outside was white and hushed. The labor was long and hard, but Dorothy and the doctor from town saw her through it safely. When they placed the tiny, red-faced, wailing infant in her arms, Seraphina looked down at him and felt her whole world shift. "He is perfect," Zane whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son. "You are amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," Seraphina said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never decided. Now, looking at their son, Seraphina said, "What about Joshua? It means the Lord is salvation. I like that after everything." "Joshua Quinton," Zane said, testing the name. "It is perfect." Joshua grew from a tiny infant to a chubby baby, and then a toddler racing around the ranch on unsteady legs. He had Seraphina's brown hair and Zane's warm eyes, and he was loved by everyone at the Running W. Dorothy spoiled him shamelessly, and the ranch hands took turns teaching him about horses and cattle and the land. When Joshua was 3, Seraphina gave birth to their daughter, Mary, who had Zane's dark hair and Seraphina's determined chin. And 2 years after that came another son, Daniel, who was quiet and observant even as a baby. As the children grew, so did Seraphina and Zane's savings. Walter and Dorothy were getting older, and they began to talk about retiring, maybe moving to Salt Lake City to be near their own children. They offered to sell the Running W to Zane and Seraphina at a fair price, payable over time. It was a huge decision, a terrifying responsibility. But Zane and Seraphina talked late into the night and ultimately decided to accept the offer. In 1892, 10 years after that day when a homeless girl stole bread and a cowboy told her to sit down and eat with him, they became the owners of the Running W Ranch. The work was even harder now, with all the responsibility falling on their shoulders. But they built the ranch into something prosperous and respected. Seraphina's horse training became well known throughout the territory, and Zane's fair treatment of the hands meant they could keep good workers who stayed for years. They added to the house over time, building more rooms for their growing family. Another son came, then twin daughters, and finally a last son. 7 children in all, each one loved and wanted and raised to know their worth. Seraphina never forgot what it felt like to be hungry and homeless and desperate. She kept that memory close, and it informed how she treated others. When someone came to the ranch looking for work or help, she remembered a cowboy who had seen past her circumstances to the person underneath. More than once, she hired someone who seemed to be at the end of their rope and gave them the same chance she had been given. Some of those chances worked out and some did not, but she never regretted trying. Joshua grew up to take over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, showing the same patience with animals and people that his father had. Mary surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property for the children of the workers and neighboring families. Daniel found his passion in breeding horses, developing a line that became sought after across the territory. The other children each found their own paths, but they all stayed close, drawn by the bonds of family and the land they loved. Zane and Seraphina grew older together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming weathered from work and weather. But their love never dimmed. They still took walks in the evening when work allowed, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. On their 20th anniversary, Zane gave her a new ring, this one with a real diamond, but Seraphina wore it on her right hand. The garnet ring never left her left hand, the symbol of the day when he had promised her forever, and she had chosen to believe in good things. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were settled, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the land they had built together. Sometimes they talked about the early days, about that moment in Silver Reef when everything had changed. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not stopped me that day?" Seraphina asked once. "If you had just let me run away with that bread?" "I think about it sometimes," Zane admitted, "but I try not to dwell on the paths we did not take. This path, the one we took together, that is the one that matters." "I was so scared that day," Seraphina said. "So angry at the world, I thought I would always be alone, always fighting just to survive." "But you were not alone," Zane said, pulling her close. "You just had not found your people yet." "My people," Seraphina repeated, liking the sound of it. "That is what you all are not you? My people, my family, my home." "Always," Zane promised and kissed her temple, "until the last star falls from the sky." The years continued to pass, marked by births and deaths, joys and sorrows, successes and setbacks. Walter and Dorothy passed within months of each other, dying peacefully in their sleep in the Salt Lake City house they had retired to. Seraphina's sister-in-law, Rebecca, came for a long visit and ended up staying, finding work in Silver Reef and becoming a regular presence at family dinners. Thomas Hayes, the young red-headed cowboy who had been there when Seraphina first arrived, married one of the neighbor's daughters and bought a small ranch of his own nearby. They remained friends, their children growing up together, and Thomas never let Seraphina forget that he had been the first to compliment her biscuits all those years ago. The Running W continued to prosper under Seraphina and Zane's stewardship. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and changing times. The 19th century gave way to the 20th, bringing automobiles and telephones and all manner of modern conveniences, but the basic work of ranching remained the same. Cattle still needed to be herded, horses still needed to be trained, and the land still demanded respect and hard work. Seraphina watched her children grow into adults with pride and occasional worry. She had given them stability and love, and a home that would always welcome them, all the things she had lost so young. But she had also taught them about the harder sides of life, about the importance of compassion for those who were struggling, about how quickly circumstances could change and how vital it was to help others when you could. As grandchildren began to arrive, Seraphina found a new joy in the role. She taught them to bake bread and tend gardens, to approach a nervous horse with patience and gentle hands. She told them stories of the old days, of their grandfather bringing her home when she had nothing, of building a life from dust and determination and love. "You were so brave, Grandma," one of her granddaughters said once, listening wide-eyed to the story. "I was desperate," Seraphina corrected gently. "Bravery came later when I chose to trust again, to believe I could have more than just survival. That is the real courage, sweetheart. Not the fighting, but the hoping." Zane's health began to fail when he was in his 60s, his body worn down by decades of hard physical labor. He did not complain, but Seraphina saw him move more slowly, saw the pain he tried to hide. She took over more of his work, and Joshua stepped up to fill the gap, but it hurt her heart to see the vital, strong man she had married diminished by time and toil. But even weakened, Zane remained himself. His smile still lit his face when she entered a room. His hand still found hers as they sat together in the evening. His love remained constant and sure. One spring evening, when the world was soft with new green growth, and the air smelled of rain and possibility, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. Zane had been quiet all day, more withdrawn than usual, and Seraphina felt a cold fear in her stomach that she tried to ignore. "I have been thinking about that day we met," Zane said suddenly. "The way you looked at me when I told you to sit down and eat. Like you could not believe anyone would be kind without wanting something in return." "I could not believe it," Seraphina said. "I had learned not to trust kindness." "But you did trust me," Zane said. "Even though you were scared, even though every instinct told you to run, you stayed. You sat down and ate with me. That was brave, Seraphina. That was so brave." "You made it easy," she said, her hand tightening on his. "You saw me as a person, not a problem or a victim or an opportunity. You gave me back my humanity." "You never lost your humanity," Zane said. "It was just buried under survival for a while. But it was always there, waiting for a safe place to emerge." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Seraphina wanted to hold this moment forever, to keep them suspended here in this perfect evening where everything was all right. But Zane spoke again, his voice soft. I want you to know something. I want you to know that loving you, building this life with you, has been the greatest joy of my existence. You took a simple cowboy with nothing but a good horse and a steady job and made him into something more. You gave me purpose and family and a reason to be better than I was. Zane, you are scaring me, Seraphina said, tears starting to blur her vision. Why does this feel like goodbye? Because I think it might be, Zane said gently. I am tired, my love, so tired, and I think my time is coming to an end. No, Seraphina said, but the word came out as a sob. No, you are not allowed to leave me. We have more time. We have to have more time. We have had more time than most people ever get, Zane said. 40 years of marriage, 7 children, more grandchildren than I can count. We built something beautiful, Seraphina. We took broken pieces and made something whole. I cannot do this without you, Seraphina whispered. You can, Zane said with certainty. You are the strongest person I know. You survived things that would have destroyed most people, and you did not just survive, you thrived. You will grieve me, and that is all right. But you will keep going, keep living, keep being the amazing woman you have always been. He pulled her close, and she buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, trying to memorize every detail. They sat like that as the sun disappeared and the stars came out, holding each other against the inevitable. Zane passed peacefully in his sleep, 2 nights later, with Seraphina holding his hand and all their children gathered around. The grief was enormous, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. But true to Zane's faith in her, Seraphina survived it. She leaned on her children and grandchildren, on the land and the work and the memories of the beautiful life they had built together. She continued to run the ranch with Joshua's help, continued to work with the horses, continued to live. It was hard, harder than almost anything she had endured, but she did it because that was what Zane would have wanted. She did it because she owed it to the girl she had been, the one who had been given a second chance at life and had seized it with both hands. The years after Zane's death were bittersweet. Seraphina missed him with an ache that never fully faded, but she found joy in watching her family grow and flourish. She saw great-grandchildren born, saw the ranch continue to prosper under Joshua's leadership. She saw Mary's school expand, saw Daniel's horses win prizes at competitions across the state, and she made sure to remember always what Zane had taught her. That kindness mattered. That seeing people's humanity, especially when circumstances had stripped away their dignity, was one of the most important things a person could do. That a single act of compassion could change the entire trajectory of a life. When a thin, desperate-looking young woman showed up at the ranch looking for work, dirty and ragged and trying so hard to appear strong, Seraphina hired her on the spot. When Joshua questioned the decision, concerned about whether the girl could be trusted, Seraphina just smiled. "Give her a chance," she said. "Everyone deserves a chance. Someone gave me one once and it changed everything." Seraphina lived to be 83 years old, a remarkable age for a woman of her generation. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, still offering advice on the horses, still teaching her grandchildren to bake bread, still telling stories about the early days. On a cool autumn evening, surrounded by 3 generations of family in the house she and Zane had built together, Seraphina slipped away peacefully. Her last words, whispered to Joshua who sat beside her bed, were, "Tell them the story. Tell them how your father saved me and how I learned to save myself. Tell them love is always worth the risk." At her funeral, the church in Silver Reef was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Ranch hands she had hired when no one else would, neighbors she had helped through hard times. children and great-grandchildren who carried her legacy forward. They told stories of her kindness, her strength, her unshakable belief in second chances. And in the years that followed, the story of Seraphina and Zane became part of the family legend, passed down through generations. The story of a homeless girl who stole bread from a cowboy's table, and the cowboy who said, "Sit down and eat with me," and how that simple act of decency had grown into a love that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that touched hundreds of lives. The Running W Ranch continued for generations, always remembering its roots, always maintaining the values that Seraphina and Zane had instilled. A commitment to fair treatment of workers, a willingness to give chances to those who needed them, a belief that how you treated people in their moments of desperate need said everything about who you really were. In the years following Seraphina's passing, Joshua found the journal his father had given her that first Christmas, the leather-bound book with blank pages. She had filled it with her memories, writing down the story of her life so it would not be forgotten. He read it aloud to his children and grandchildren, and they marveled at how different her beginning had been from the strong, confident matriarch they had known. The journal's last entry was dated just a week before her death. In her shaky but still legible handwriting, Seraphina had written, "I have lived a long life, much longer than I ever expected when I was a starving girl on the streets of Silver Reef. I have known great love and deep sorrow, have built something from nothing, have raised children and watched them raise their own. If I could speak to that desperate 19-year-old girl, the one who was so hungry and so scared and so certain she would always be alone, I would tell her to hold on. I would tell her that kindness exists, that love is real, that the life she dreams of is possible. I would tell her that stealing a piece of bread from a stranger's table will lead to everything she never knew she wanted. I would tell her that the cowboy with the kind eyes is going to be her home, and together they will build something beautiful that lasts long after they are gone. Most of all, I would tell her that she is stronger than she knows, and that she deserves every bit of happiness that is coming her way. Hold on, little Seraphina. Hold on. The good part is coming." The journal became a treasured family heirloom, along with the garnet ring that Seraphina had worn until her last day, the symbol of the moment when everything changed. The ring was passed down through the generations, given to each new bride as a reminder that love and kindness could transform the world, one person at a time. And so the story lived on, not as a fairy tale but as a true account of how love could grow from the smallest acts of human decency, how broken things could be made whole, and how the choice to help a stranger could ripple outward to touch lives not yet born. The story of Seraphina and Zane, the homeless girl and the cowboy, became more than just a romance. It became a reminder that every person mattered, that circumstances did not define worth, and that choosing compassion over indifference could change the entire course of history, one life at a time.